Okay. Hello, this is John Grom, and welcome to our 212th Right and Left Discussion Forum. We hold our televised discussions twice monthly to demonstrate the value of civil, productive, open-minded political dialogue. Today, our panel is going to discuss diversity. What exactly does it mean? And is it working? And how is it working? Today, our panel begins with Dr. Ronald Chamberlin, a retired senior research chemist, Tom Finley, former vice president of Rubbermaid Incorporated, Patty Haskins, and former member of the Wadsworth City Council, and Bryan Laubaugh, president of R&B Financial Services. Ron, after 50 years of experience, how would you grade the effectiveness of our noble experiment with diversity?
John, I've been out of the workforce for over 20 years, but I do have a couple of comments. I did some reading here to get some definitions, and something came out of this that I hadn't really considered, but probably equally important. Let me just read a little bit here. My eyes will work for you. Diversity is a range of human differences, including but not limited to race, ethnicity, gender identity, sexual orientation, social class, age, physical ability or attributes, religious or ethical value systems, national origin, or political beliefs. But along with this, it's just not that's particularly useful to have a diverse environment or workplace, but you need inclusion. And this is defined as involvement and empowerment, where the inherent worth and dignity of all peoples are recognized. An inclusive university or workplace promotes and sustains a sense of belonging. It values and practices respect for the talents, beliefs, backgrounds, and ways of living of its members. Well, I found a report here from a group called the Whitney Group, and they have done a series of studies on diversity, and a report that came out in 2019, just before COVID. And what they did is they looked at about 1,000 different large companies from over 50 different countries, and studied how diversity was playing out at those workplaces. So, and here's a conclusion they found here. Our latest report shows that. I'm sorry, my eyes are failing me a little bit here. It shows that only that the business case remains robust, but that the relationship between diversity on executive teams and the likelihood of financial outperformance has strengthened over time. However, they did find that in these communities, in these businesses, there was more increasing polarization. Industries were backsliding and perhaps static or backsliding. So the diversity was not being quite as robust as it was, but where it is, it was giving increasingly good results in those those companies in terms of the bottom line, and the executives being recognizing of this, and within their companies, in those companies, they were this was still very important. I did look up, found a study here which listed the benefits and some of the drawbacks. And I'll only read a couple of these, but diverse cultural perspectives can inspire creativity and drive innovation. Local market knowledge and insight makes a business more competitive and profitable. A diverse skills base allows an organization to offer a broader and more adaptable range of products and services. And then some of the disadvantages that they found, read a couple of these. Professional communication can be misinterpreted or difficult to understand across language and cultures. I think maybe companies that have an international footprint may find that particularly important. And different understanding of professional etiquette can happen. Well, as I say, I've been out of the workforce myself for a long time, but as John, as you mentioned, some 50 years or so, this has been going on. And I can only attest a little personal anecdote here. I came from a small town, and there was some ethnic diversity. There were supposedly a couple of black families in town, but I never saw them. In my high school, there was only one person who was a little more diverse than others. His father was Korean. He became and remains my best friend. So I knew that. But when I went to college, it was exhilarating. Here were people from all over the state and all over the country, and from a number of foreign countries. I met some Jewish people. I'd never known any Jewish people before, but here were some folks from New York City and New Jersey and Philadelphia and Aliquippa, Pennsylvania, and we had a Christian Arab from Palestine was there. He was a refugee. There were a couple of ladies from Poland, and it was an amazing thing. And the creativity and the cross fertilization, it made me, I think, a more aware person, and it stimulated my thinking. I worked then for my first job after, and graduate school was even more so, even more wide, at least from national origin of folks. And my first job was at PPG Industries here in Barberton in a research lab, and at that point, we're looking here early 1960s. It was not quite so diverse. Over the years or so, there began to be a little bit more so. There were a number more of black people from the community being hired. And that wasn't true initially. But then when I went to Connecticut in 1984, this was a purely research institute, and there were folks from all over, in both in the executive branch and in the laboratories. There were folks here from India. We had a relationship with the Japanese company Mitsubishi, and there was one of their employees on site, and I got to interact with him. And there were just folks from all over. Danbury, Connecticut had been the site of the American hat industry at one point, and there were Portuguese families. About 300 Portuguese families, and the city of Danbury had an ethnic festival every year, and there are 35 different ethnic groups in that small city, about the size of Barberton or so. So it was a fascinating environment, and I could certainly see the thing. Certainly in the biological world, diversity is well understood in a forest ecology. For example, the mushrooms feed on the decayed wood, and the nutrients from that goes into that, and the animals eat the plants, and so on and so forth. Cultural diversity, I'm sure, is modeled somewhat on that. And even in biological, within species, any person who raises livestock knows that you need a diverse gene pool. And for people, it's not a good idea to marry your first cousin. So you need diversity of genetics as well as that. And I think that the cultural diversity movement is probably modeled on that to some extent, and has apparently, from what I can have read here from results going on and studies which have been done, can have similar benefits. Watching out for the diversities, and what is very important is that with a diverse community, diverse workforce, diverse school, it's important to also foster the inclusion, to bring people into the picture, to make them part of the team. That's very important, and I think it's a good movement. I think I hope it continues. So.
Okay, from what I gather from your comments, Ron, that your thoughts about diversity are sort of limited to having a variety of people from a variety of backgrounds in the same place at the same time. But I'm wondering about other aspects of diversity. Tom, in your multiple careers in public education and a multinational corporation, have you seen any value to the whole concept of diversity?
I think I'm going to answer that, John, by telling my experience voting this time when I walked into the voting booth, because I have been thinking about this topic, and I just looked at that voting booth, which was crowded, people waiting. The diversity I saw was just within that environment. And when I thought about that and looked at this big picture, the very founding of our country was based upon the acceptance and success of living with diversity and using it as a growth, etc. We had that tremendous test of the Civil War as to whether that business of diversity was going to be workable. And of course, it has been. And as I looked in that church, in that environment, I saw race, 3 different races, present, men, women. And of course, I'm in a Christian church, but there were obviously people in there that were probably not of Christian faith. So just that one experience of this past week had me focusing on diversity with a great deal of pride. I think we've been tremendously successful as a country in moving forward with the obstacles that occur as a result of that commitment to diversity.
Andy, I'm wondering if you're really old enough to remember a voting booth like Tom does.
Oh, I do.
You do. Good.
Yeah.
Tell me, what are your feelings about the value of diversity?
Well, and I do think that diversity is valuable in that it allows, in any situation, for a group to hear or to have the opinions of all possible stakeholders that are involved in solving a problem, whatever. Whether it be, if it's in politics, if you are dealing with a situation in Congress, it's important to hear from the politician from the Farm Belt, as it's important to hear from the politician from downtown Philadelphia, because they all have different stories to tell and different interests and different things that affect them. Now, that diversity can be in age, it can be in sex, it can be in race. Diversity can be simply the divisions between the 2 parties. It's because each group has their own special outlook and or special needs. It's important when coming to any type of decision that you get all of that input. One of the places I saw this, and this is going to sound really silly, but I was president of the teachers union for, almost 20 years. And one of the things I found, as I was a secondary school teacher, I did 6 years in middle school and then the rest of my career at the high school. The needs of a high school teacher were so completely different from the needs of an elementary teacher. I know we would have our board meetings and people would come and you'd hear these stories about, I remember the one was a certain color paper that they needed, that the elementary teacher needed. That was an absolute essential. To a secondary teacher, that sounded ridiculous. But without that diversity of having them there, we didn't realize that that was a problem for them. And by listening to that, we found and come up with things that were in the best interest of everybody that was on the staff. And that applied when we were drawing up a contract. We had to take into consideration the needs of the elementary schools and the needs of the secondary schools. That's true in politics today. You have to take into consideration the needs of that farm worker just as much and in the same manner as the needs of the factory worker in Philadelphia or any other case. Now, the only disadvantage to this in politics, I think, is because in some cases, when it comes down to political parties, which is a form of diversity, because they are so different, they don't listen to each other, and then things become blocked up and nothing gets done. We have a roadblock situation, and neither side wants to compromise or listen to the other side. The purpose of diversity is to expose one another to the needs, the wants, the requirements for other groups of people. And when we fail to listen to that, then this whole experiment of diversity becomes moot.
Brian, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this that totally agree with what Patty had to say.
I think I agree with her and Ron and Tom in principle. One of the issues that I think companies experience, that in their efforts to become diverse, they lower a particular standard so that they can have what I would consider a diversity hire. We're seeing this in our military. Our military is really trying to be diverse, all different types of people. And, you know, they've had to lower the standard to achieve that diversity. And that's an unfortunate, I guess, unintended consequence of just looking at a particular way of doing things, to have a diverse, military, to have a diverse company. There are times when it's very hard to reach diversity. You know, if you're in the middle of Iowa and you're trying to put a company together, I'm not sure how much diversity that you're going to get. You might have diversity of thought, but you might not have a rainbow of color of people. So it's difficult to achieve those things just when you're looking at trying to say, you know, we're checking all the boxes in our organization. You know, we've hired this particular type of person, this particular so we can consider ourselves diverse. What's going around now in the corporate world is ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And, you know, large money managers are requiring companies that they invest in to reach these ESG goals. And if they feel that you're not, you know, in whatever they are, if you're not doing your best to reach those goals, they don't fund you. So I worry about that, you know, we overlay particular requirements on companies and individuals and organizations, and we don't look at the unintended consequences. You know, we could talk about preference hiring. You know, that was really big. You know, you have a preference. You need to hire so many of this particular group of people, so many of that particular group of people, or, you know, you're just run up the flagpole. It's just the worst thing going. But so I agree that there needs to be diversity. I just worry about some of the unintended consequences that come with it. I'm all for diversity of thought, diversity of color, diverse. I'm all for that. I just worry sometimes that when in that, I guess, in going about that, we have a tendency, or companies have a tendency, to overlook maybe a better candidate for that job, or overlook, you know, other aspects of an organization just to reach what they feel is a diverse workforce, or a diverse organization. So that's my only concern about, you know, running headlong into diversity. I'm all for it. I'm right there with everybody. I just worry sometimes about the unintended consequences of it.
Bryan, you might be
I
surprised
never heard
to hear a liberal say it, but sometimes one size fits all doesn't really work very well.
Yeah.
Brian,
An
you
example of
mentioned
some place that where diversity is completely non-existent is social media. Think about the Facebook groups that you see. You know,
Right.
Bryan, you're probably one of the only out of the closet Republicans in my Facebook group of Facebook friends. So,
Brian, you mentioned ESG.
Yes.
When they set their, I've never heard of that. When they set their requirements, is it on race, age, sex, everything?
Yeah. So basically, it's
Interesting.
environmental. They look at how well, you know, what are you doing to be sustainable? What are you doing as far as climate change? What are you doing? What is your organization? What is their carbon footprint? You know, what are you doing? Social would be everything you could possibly imagine, you know, from diversity to, your involvement in the community. It's just, and then governance is, you know, how well is your company being governed? And, you know, do you have a diverse corporate suite? You know, do are you bringing along people in the organization? And when you stop, if you don't hit those metrics, and it's different for everybody, BlackRock, which is a very large institutional investor, they've really pushed this ESG over the last several years. And, they're not investing in certain businesses that they feel don't meet that criteria. And I just think that sometimes it leaves good companies out because they can't adapt quick enough, to these particular standards. So.
Well, let me throw this out. I think that diversity has been a tremendous success if all you're talking about is the LGBT and all the other letters that have been added to that over the years, particularly in the area of race, that we are required by law or different corporations and so forth to judge people by the content of their skin color rather than their character. And all that matters is the listing of how many people of diverse backgrounds, of diverse races, and that count. But I'm thinking about the fact that in addition to having multiple races present, we always hope that the variety of beliefs and values and mores would together produce a dynamic synergism and would help decision making. And I looked something up, up until we started our campaign on diversity, the United States Congress was made up mostly of white males. There were a few females in there. The stress on diversity wound up with by 2015, the U.S. Congress had 103 females, 45 African Americans, 32 Hispanics, 11 Asian Americans, 28 Jews, 2 Muslims, and 7 LGBT. And a couple of Buddhists and atheists tossed in. What happened to the United States Congress? Did we have a dynamic synergism with enhanced decision making? What happened is all these groups formed their own caucuses, their own clubs, and carved out their own place and thought only of their own self-interest and campaigned against everyone else. It seems to me that from that point of view of the dynamic synergism, from having a variety of people, it's been a monumental failure. We've just created more and more antagonism. When's the last time you heard of a white cop shoot a black kid that did not result in a riot? The details around the circumstances on that shooting were irrelevant. All that matters is it was a white cop and a black kid. We've come to that after all these years of diversity, close to 50 now. We don't have that synergism and that dynamic decision making going on. We've got more and more anti-everything than we've ever had before, it seems.
John, what you're pointing out is a failure of inclusion. People.
Yes.
This is the backsliding. This is the polarization that is really counter to that, and it's not a fault of the diversity. It's just a fault of the mindset to allow people to include, as Patty says, the needs and desires and of other people in the group. So.
Wasn't that supposed to be a product of diversity?
Not really.
No?
Not really. I mean, if you're of good faith and good heart, yes. By knowing people from with other situations, if you can respond to that and say, okay, this has you have as much worth as I do, but if you can't see that, and I don't know why you might not be able to see that, but if so, then it fails. I don't see that it's necessarily true. It's exposure is good. Exposure is necessary, and it won't happen without that exposure to the other people. But it doesn't guarantee it. Human beings are human beings.
I think we're getting an indicator that our time is about up. Boy, I would like to continue this discussion, not just in the post thing here, but in another program. Well, let's think about that. In the meantime, we'll see you all in 2 weeks.
You are watching WCTV, Wadsworth Community Television.